of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the king of podcasts.
Here we go again, episode 185 of the Broadcasters Podcast. On this program, we're going to talk about the news media and media in general and how the numbers are telling the story of the downfall, tragically, of news media across the board. We're going to talk about that for a good portion of the program tonight. Peak TV is dead, long live peak streaming. Variety also has their own set of numbers on the change from the traditional model of watching television to the streaming model and what has changed for all that as well. BuzzFeed going public, what's now up for Vice and Vox because of the ongoing things with the news media. Well, what are they going to do to try to continue to get money to come in to help facilitate all of these outlets of news that are out there? Because there's a reason why they're not making any money. And that's what you have to understand as well. And this story that comes out from the State of the News Media 2021 from Pew Research really does speak a lot of things. We're going to go into the numbers and talk about it. So in the project itself, they offer an annual report on key audience and economic indicators for a variety of sectors within the U.S. news media industry. It does not reflect everywhere else. But we know there's a lot of bias, a lot of really just a lot of opinionation, opining of the news. News and opinion are lockstep now. It doesn't matter where you look at it. That's where we are. And it makes news, that doesn't even make news palatable. Like the news as what it was, to just report, it's passe. Nobody wants to do that anymore. It's a lost cause. It's just nobody wants to do it now at all. So we're going to go through some of the fact sheets that Pew Research has talked about. So the data speaks to the shifting ways in which Americans seek out news and information, how news organizations get their revenue, and the resources available to American journalists as they seek to inform the public about important events. The press is sometimes called the fourth estate, the fourth branch of government, but it's also very much a business, one whose ability to serve the public is dependent on its ability to attract eyeballs and dollars. Now, what's happened has been an increase in lack of interest, number one, by people that are not wanting to go ahead and subscribe to, number one, content is not local or of a real interest to their community because it's being nationalized. Staffs are getting denigrated. There's not a lot of people that are working on stories right now when you have a lot of stories that are from the Associated Press or from other national or global news outlets. When you're looking at local television, how many times do you see a local reporter or somebody in the newsroom actually reporting on something when they're looking at some of the corporate entities that own these local TV stations that are putting out their own content? It's becoming that more and more It's becoming more and more that all the time. That's just how it is. So the Pew Research Center put out a series of fact sheets showcasing the most important, current, and historical data points for each sector, a few at a time. And they've been doing this since 2004, by the way. They stopped in 2018, and now they're back with this. So a couple of the fact sheets we have so far, let's go to digital news. There's a lot to get into here, but I want to just highlight some of the things to make the point of how news is being consumed and how people are actually consuming their news where they do not want anybody putting their own 2 cents into the story. You can't avoid that. And many people are to the point where they don't want to decrypt or decode stories to find that out. Where all that matters to them is the headline, which might be a misconstrued thing. Because even in the stories themselves, the headlines can be misconstrued. They can also be altered. They can also be configured in a way to create a narrative, to create clickbait. We know that. It's very, very prominent. I do a little bit of that myself. When I try to do SEO-friendly subject and I put titles for this program, listen, I'm doing the same thing. But it is to try to draw eyeballs to a show that's talking about information that is the precipice of what this digital disruption is all about, and the ongoing changes that are going on, and how broadcasters like you can benefit from all these changes. Because news is still important to a lot of people, but the way it's getting reported, the way that people can go and get out there, run a blog, start a Substack, if people want to get into the journalism field now, what is the benefit? What's the advantage? And do people still have respect for journalists? You got to ask yourself that question. So digital news. The vast majority of the adults in the United States get some news, at least some news online. The online space has become a host for the digital homes of both legacy news outlets and new born-on-the-web news outlets. And digital advertising revenue across all digital entities continues to grow. Tech companies playing a large role in the flow of both news and revenue. The audience, they say, according to ComScore, the news outlets that are here of their primary domain, they average at least 10 million unique visitors per month from October to December of each year analyzed. So digital native news publishers, they're looking at sites like Axios or HuffPost, so-called legacy news organizations that originated in print or broadcast like the New York Times or Fox News, and 97 other outlets that made up for 10 million monthly visitors to a source's flagship website. So going directly to the source, 10 million monthly viewers or viewers across the board. Now, outlets have several options for reaching consumers online. They could use apps, newsletters, podcasts, aggregation platforms like Apple News or Flipboard. 7 in 10 of these highest traffic news outlets have apps for at least one or two of the main mobile platforms. And those outlets that do have apps tend to offer them for both platforms. So they have done the mobile apps, and people are trying to go to that. The next part is news outlets adopting other digital outreach and engagement methods. So going through, outlets that offer newsletters. 93% of this group right here, they do have newsletters to present. They have an official presence on Flipboard or Apple News. 95 or 88% respectively. 3 in the 4 of these entities will release podcasts. And less than 40% will allow comments on articles. So very little room for other input. The outlets are also highly likely to use social media as part of their outreach. These outlets all have regularly a Facebook and Twitter presence. 9 in 10 have a presence on Instagram and YouTube. Fewer have accounts on TikTok and Snapchat. Now, they talk about advertising continuing to grow. Okay. They're using mobile advertising revenue that's been growing rapidly. And the digital side, just from websites, does grow. So that's room for growth in that side, but you have to go digital. And they're using display ads, banners, videos, and other advertisements that the news organizations of their websites typically run alongside their content. And that's the idea. Videos being the largest segment of the market at $41.4 billion. So let's move along now into the next section. We're going to go into cable news. Now, there's some things that are, depicted by ethnicity and race. I'm going to pass on those. I don't need to talk about that. Cable news, which has been, kind of a bane of existence. For anybody to feel like cable news really does, support and give proper information. I mean, they might be really good at getting to breaking news when something happens and something needs to be live with cameras. Sure. Because they have a lot of affiliates that can get their story out to a lot of people in a very quick amount of time. And of course, the pandemic and the U.S. presidential election in 2020 really helped all these outlets. But we know the change of the presidency, change of administration, regardless of the circus that was going on before, the numbers have dropped. We know that for sure. So the audiences for all these cable networks, Fox News increased by 61%. CNN increased 72%. MSNBC jumped 28%. Now, of all these major cable outlets, they did run on and this is whether you agree with them or not, but they like to use emotions in order to gather a response and to keep you engaged. They're the biggest culprits. And the national news and the network news does the same thing. With cable news, they want to make sure they find ways to keep you on a 24-hour cycle of watching news. Otherwise, people would just jump in, jump out. But no, we have to have lots of opinion. We have to have lots of outrage, anger, fear, and, just disdain. Like, there's emotions that be brought out. Fear and anger is what they really are best at across the board. There is not any one of these cable news outlets that is not guilty of it. They're all to blame. And since January, I've not watched 1 minute, not 1 second, not one scintilla of any network news program or any cable news program for that matter. Just don't. Now, in 2020, they did have increases, but those increases have dropped. Now, this particular story doesn't say how much they've done, but here's the reason why they're in the business of clickbaiting and fear-mongering. Well, total revenue increased in 2020. Collectively, among all these networks, you're talking about $6 billion in revenue. Total revenue, $6 billion. That's why they're doing it. Licensing fees, which is where the cable networks have to go and carry these channels, they've declined slightly. Advertising revenue increased for all three, increasing anywhere from 9 to 12%. And that's what they did. That's where it comes from. So they're talking only through 2020, but they're not talking about what the decline has come right now if they look at most recent reports. But again, the news media was only reported now for 2020 and being reported now in July. Network TV, let's get into that as well. Yes, sure, there was also an increase, but I just want to look at the numbers of their advertising, why they do what they do. The economics, well, they don't share the amount of what they're making in advertising, but they showed growth. But that's an interesting thing that they weren't able to get. Kantar Media, which actually was able to get into the economics, they can only estimate the amount of money paid by advertisers rather than the amount of revenue actually earned by the network. So they don't have a clue how much these companies are making. No clue. They can't figure it out. So they can try to figure out what they're putting out there and seeing what they think you can try to guess. They're not even sure. Moving along, local TV news. And in this, they say that television is still a common place for Americans to get their news. Local TV on par or outpacing cable and network TV. As you know, because of the lack of good programming throughout the lineup, there's a lot more key time slots for all these local TV stations running more newscasts between 4 and 7 o'clock in the evening and late at night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. In terms of the revenue, local TV over-the-air advertising revenue total $18.4 billion. All those election ads, all those other ads going on for the pandemic and other things like that. That's big money. Total digital advertising revenue increased to $1.4 billion. And digital advertising accounts for 7% of their ad revenue total. That's big money. And that's what they care about. That's what matters. And that's just all they care about. Newspapers, let's move on to that. In the newspapers, circulation for newspapers, digital and print combined, 24.3 million readers for weekday, 25.8 million for Sundays, each down 6%. And we've talked about the newspapers and the publications dropping across the board. Weekly print circulation decreased 19%. Sunday print circulation decreased 14%. Newspapers are going to die. They're going to become extinct in the next decade. I've said this before. I will continue to say this now. Digital circulation is difficult to gauge. There's only estimates saying that digital circulation in 2020 as projected to have risen sharply. The three of the highest circulation daily papers is the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post, which all have big, fat paywalls. And they have not fully reported their digital circulation. Times and Journal provide data on digital subscriptions and publicly available reports, but it's not the same as circulation and may not be counted under the same rules. So they don't know. The fact that they have to go and hide what they're doing and what they're able to do. And the average minutes for people per visit of the top 50 newspapers by circulation has dropped every quarter since 2014. Yep. Advertising revenue for the newspaper industry in 2020 was $8.8 billion. But again, they want to have stories that are clickbait, rage bait, anger, scare, mortify. That's the plan. They do some good. A lot of times it's the editors and publishers are telling them, no, you need to do this. And they have no choice. How about the staffing in newsrooms? According to the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics, over 30,000 people worked as reporters, editors, photographers, film or video editors, and operators in the newspaper industry. Down 12% from 2019, down 57% in 2004. And the wages are down. Editors for a newspaper average about $50,000 a year. Reporters, $36,000. Why even do it? For what? Audio and podcasting. My department. The audience for terrestrial radio remains high, but there was a slight drop in 2020. In 2020, 83% of Americans ages 12 or older listen to terrestrial radio in a given week, down slightly from 89% in 2019. Now, that's, of course, they're going to say the pandemic was the ultimate cause for that. But terrestrial listenership has gone down every year since 2009, as they've been reporting. The share of Americans who listen to podcasts has substantially increased. 2021, 41% of Americans ages 12 or older have listened to a podcast in the last month, up from 37% in 2020 and just 9% in 2008. So big difference. 28% of those 12 and older said they listened to a podcast in the last week, up from 24% in 2020 and 7% when it was first measured in 2013. So listenership and podcasting continues to grow across the board. NPR has been one of the best people to take advantage of the podcasting audience because their shows such as Up First and Fresh Air on the Apple Podcast lists, they rose from 11.3 million listeners in 2019 to 14 million in 2020, according to information provided by NPR. Public Radio Exchange reported now 8 million average weekly unique unique users in 2020. 68% of Americans ages 12 and older had listened to online audio in the past month. 62% listened in the past week. And continues to grow since they've been charting this. The economics. Average radio revenue, terrestrial radio, by the way, down sharply 24% for stations in all news format. Average station revenue for stations in all news format dropped from 18.1 million in 2019 to 13.9 million in 2020. And average revenue for all news or news talk info stations is substantially lower than when looking at all news stations alone, about $2.1 million per station. It's barely enough to keep the transmitter on. And then the staffing. 3,360 news employees in the radio broadcasting industry of over 7,000 stations in the country, by the way. And that's 1,000 fewer in 2004 when there were 4,290 employees. And then let's just say the numbers here. Now, the median wage for news analysts, reporters, and journalists in the radio broadcasting industry was about $49,000. Ha! That's pretty funny. Editors in the radio broadcasting industry had a median annual wage of $79,000. Who's paying that? I don't know if a lot of people are paying that much money. There's something going on there. It's very fishy. There's not many people that are making that kind of money. Unless they have had tenure and they have kept contracts with them across the board. I don't know. So they have a couple of takeaways of the news media in 2020, and this is what the overall findings they had found. Number one, newspapers made more money from circulation than from advertising. Number two, cable channels saw explosive growth in 2020, but that's, of course, with a lot of major news events that once-in-a-lifetime type stuff. Okay. Political ad revenue at local TV stations was higher, much higher in 2020 than in previous years. Over $2 billion in election ads. Because they continue to go ahead and spend earlier and spend lots more. And remember, those are campaign dollars that all American people are putting money in on. Is it money worth spent? Well spent? I don't know. Individual giving is making up a larger revenue of the pie for public broadcasters. So it's not so much where they're being relied upon for the government bringing in money to them. It's that there are people that are funding these stations, which they could go ahead and run standalone. They don't need the government support, but that's what they're going to do. Total advertising revenue beyond just news is now mostly digital. More ad revenue came from digital advertising than non-digital advertising, such as print and broadcast. And mobile advertising doing even more, rising almost 60-fold between 2011 and 2020. Currently now over $100 billion. While terrestrial radio listenership declined in 2020, the audience to or online audio has grown. The digital disruption, just in the news media, tells you everything. And the kind of money that's on the line for all these news entities to continue to thrive and grow. They're trying to do whatever it takes to make that happen. And they're struggling. And they're not doing well. And while news might be a certain way, people are starting to catch, they're starting to pick up the drift. They're starting to realize that things are not the way they are. And I think people are just getting more distrusted in news than ever. And it doesn't matter your political views. There used to be a time where you lived your life around what the news told you, what information you got from the news. But that's very few and far between. I mean, some news outlets, they put a big fat paywall underneath stories you might be interested in. Oh, look, new restaurant opening up. Oh, look, here's the food inspection reports, things like that. Yeah, they're going to put those behind a big fat paywall. But anything about COVID, oh, we're going to put it up front for you. You know, anything we can make sure that will scare and will fearmonger and will make you just blood red angry. They're going to put that out there for free. Because they just feel like, well, they need to have this out there. And they're going to find the right people to go ahead and say the right thing about a story to give it actual context. To make sure, oh, look, we got the local community speaking out on this. Well, who'd they pick? You know? Not to mention the letters to the editor, the opinions, the comments that are not allowed to be made, only 40%. Very telling. They don't even be put flat on their face. That's what they're doing. That's where they want to go with things. That's how they prefer to have things. I thought it was truly a very interesting point they made across there. But, you know. Okay, moving on now. BuzzFeed. There's a couple of things I want to bring up that are very interesting as well. Is the fact that BuzzFeed wants to go public. And what does that mean for Vice and Vox? Well, there's a lot that can be said about that. That's the other approach that some of these news outlets are trying to do. Well, they can't rely on getting money from their subscribers. Well, now they're just going to go and say, well, we're just going to go ahead and move along to making another way to get out there. We're just going to publicly trade ourselves. And how much is that going to do? You know? So in this story I take from the New York Times, There is not so long ago when newspapers and magazines went bankrupt across the country. BuzzFeed and a few other fast-growing web publications seem to be the future of the news industry. Investors poured billions into Vox Media, Vice Media, Group 9, and other startups that have employed copywriters fully comfortable with the new digital culture and increased speed online journalism. Valuations have skyrocketed, and the founders of the companies have made winning rounds with every funding round. Now things have changed. So while the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal have flourished thanks to an emphasis on digital journalism and a strategy of building readers for online access, a number of top web journalists have decamped for these century-old institutions as investors demand returns on the money they have invested in digital businesses when they were in fashion. So now, in an effort to regain their stature and compete with the biggest in the likes of Facebook and Google, which are earning huge amounts of online ad revenue, BuzzFeed, Vox Media, Vice Media, and Group 9 have grown in recent years thanks to mergers and acquisitions. So we can go through all the acquisitions, but we're just doing that. The agreements were only a start. And then they go into each of these companies. The media industry has become a bar. On the one hand, you have the Washington Post, which has 3.2 million subscribers to print and digital newspapers. The Wall Street Journal, 3.4 million. New York Times, 6 million. Big news operations rely on their prestige, scale, and experience to attract good. At the other end of the spectrum are the Information, the Insider, Axios, and others who are hyper-focused, reporting on topics of particular interest to a smaller but intensely loyal audience. It gets murky between the two extremes because there is tough competition with traditional mainstream posts and with Facebook and Google for ad dollars. Now, PSPCs are at the center of many digital companies considering the reposition itself. Known as blank check companies, they're shell companies publicly traded for the purpose of buying a private company and getting it public without the regulatory hassle that comes with a public offering initial, or like SPACs in the very same case. Digital publishers see this arcane once the Wall Street maneuver as a way to raise funds at valuations that could match the financing rounds of the Wall Street maneuvers for more favorable conditions. Blank check transactions have become more difficult to achieve, and the SEC is now inspecting PSPC mergers, may possibly issue new rules, keeping the transactions under the same standards than a traditional IPO. So we know that there are companies that are trying to work with the likes of Vice Media and 7GC looking to try to get themselves in one of these companies and reaching out to investors to raise funds to complete the deal of being a part of a PSPC, as they're calling it. So these are the things that are going on right now. They're trying to survive. And, I mean, I can't knock them for trying to do it, but they've gotten funding, merged, acquired. Next thing's private equity. At some point, private equity will jump in and be a part of this. But before they get to that, we're going to the SPACs. We're going to the blank check companies. We're trying to go that route to try to keep these publications afloat. But why are they doing it? Well, because they can't rely on just their own content to overpass. I mean, you know, the art of purporting news and making money on it, it's near impossible now. Circulation, no wonder when nobody wants to buy. I just saw the other day the South Florida Sun Sentinel, being charged up to $5. Boston Globe, $5 for a Sunday newspaper. And up to what, about $2.50 for a regular paper? It's just not worth it. And the idea of anybody, reading paper, actually holding onto the paper anymore, it's just not much there anymore like that. It's not often. There's not many more people doing it anymore. Not like Now, we're not going to go super long tonight. I only have the other story I want to bring up real quick from Variety about how streaming is also creating regular television, creating a big downfall. Now, I think some programming that still might be on cable TV. We know the Olympics their ratings are going pretty bad. I was just watching tonight. ABC actually is carrying the NBA draft Like, I get the NFL draft because of the ratings it brings, but the fact they're doing the NBA draft because they have nothing else to put on. Like, they're just consolidating the coverage because there's nothing else to do. I mean, that's pretty sad. Because the NBA draft doesn't even pull the numbers like the NBA draft or the NFL draft does. So, a story from Variety's intelligence platform. Thought this was also very interesting. Now, there was a point where we had Peak TV, which was an enormous amount of television content being done for television. And now streaming is the place. So here's what we got. The rise of subscription streaming seemingly has added rocket fuel to the concept of peak streaming. And in the last few years, it's been powering that overall increases the content as traditional TV has begun to pull back. Yeah, if you look at the amount of shows being put out for new fall lineups, it's just minuscule compared to where it was in the past. Now, new seasons of shows on U.S. TV and streaming services. So looking right now, we're looking at the fact that in 2021, there are going to be 115 new shows on broadcast TV. Year before, 93. But the thing is, 115 is because of the fact that the pandemic, they had a lot more programming in the can that they're finally pushing out for this year. Cable continues to drop significantly. In cable, 2019, they had 627 shows, down to 526, down to 453. On the streaming side, 2019, there were 275 new shows on streaming. Now, 379 last year and 512 this year. But then across the board, you're talking about over 1,000 new shows. New seasons of new shows on television in general, whether it's streaming or not. That's monster. So there's a resource pullback by TV for traditional media companies. Wall Street's quick to judge a service based on looks and what's not inside, but media companies have opted for the reckless route and beefing up their digital services, their over-the-top platforms, to try to convince TV subscribers they should pay for a streaming service and a TV subscription with predictable consequences. Paying TV cancellations continue to grow every quarter as the value proposition of cable TV has eroded quicker than the Louisiana coastline. TV networks have been able to keep increasingly their monthly fees to offset the losses for now, but expecting this to continue forever would be the latest chapter in bubble mania. It's all going to come crashing down, and it could have been easily avoided if network heads opted to share their content rather than gate some of their content on premium video on demand services. Subscription video on demand. Yep. And when you look at the amount of content being put out, the top 20 networks or services airing new series, well, every year Netflix is the top. 165 shows in 2019, 215 in 2020, 221, 178 in 2021. Then you look at the others, Amazon Prime, they put out about 30 on average per year, or actually the last 6 months. Discovery, now with Discovery Plus, automatically 110 new shows. And everybody else doesn't even come in comparison. Nobody else does in comparison. Even Apple TV, 2019 had no shows, 14 in 2020, 20 in 2021. Hulu, which big streaming service, 15, 20, 15, 21 respectively. So they're only getting so many shows. But the content creators, churning out content left and right, is Netflix. And nobody else comes close. Not Peacock, not Paramount, not Disney Plus, none. Not even close. TV advertising still is a profitable business, but networks are trying to maintain it. It says everything. When advertising is not going to do so much to try to withstand, like there's still room for advertising because a lot of major agencies will still put the money out. But are people still consuming those ads and watching and really getting something from it? You got to ask yourself the question. And I'm not sure there's much of an answer to really give. But oh well. And so I'm going to leave it there tonight. We're not going to go very long. Wasn't a whole lot to go and cover into tonight. But, I mean, I'm not taking this show to go off into other tangents. Like, I mean, my When I'm Not Podcasting series, I have a number of stories I'm going to talk about that I'm going to be putting up on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/JBRASCO951, because there, there's a lot of cancel culture stuff going on between a number of artists that are out there, or, there's a lot of flack when it comes to people in the pop culture. Like, there's a lot going on right now with, say, Olivia Rodrigo or DaBaby and all these different comments being made. I put that on the other channel. We'll put it here. Even though I would like to make sure I have stories that could fill time that would make for a good show. But again, I'd rather go ahead and have a show that has chock full of content than rather just stretch it out just to try to make it an hour. Normally, that's not the case. It's easy to go and find enough information for an hour. But this week, a little light because it is the middle of the summer, and that's where we are. But for myself, I'm going to go ahead and watch Jungle Cruise in Stillwater at the movie theaters. I'll let you know. Maybe there's something I might want to go ahead and say afterwards about that. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Come back for another Broadcasters Podcast. Please go to the website, broadcasterspodcast.com. If there's any stories you want to go and follow up and catch up on yourself, you can go ahead and look at the links there. And more importantly, all the social media places you go and look for me at, you can all find the information right there. And also where you can find the show where you can go and subscribe. And please let people know about the show and let them subscribe, because I really would appreciate that. Until next week, when we do another Broadcasters Podcast, remember the content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.
Hey, it's King of Podcasts. I know I normally don't do this, but I'm going to ask you to help out. As you know, I'm an Uber driver. Now, this is not necessarily an ad for Uber in general, but I think being an Uber driver, enjoying what I do, doing Uber on a regular basis, where I do sometimes 3 to 4 days part-time, and I work, and I can make about $300, $400 a week doing that. But I also want other people to go ahead and take advantage of the same thing I do. Because Uber right now is hiring drivers like you to handle the growing demand for passenger rides. Earn as much money as you want, because you can make good money. Like if I had to go ahead and leave my full-time job, which I've thought about a couple of times because if things got kind of rough, money-wise, that'd be one thing I would do. I could see myself making up to $4,000 a month. That's not bad. I could definitely do that if given the opportunity. But the thing is, I work weekends. Sometimes I want to work at night. If I get out of the movies on Friday nights, I'll just go ahead and pick up a ride and see what happens. Like I can do that. And if I have a couple hours free and I want to go and just make some extra money, I did that today. I made $50 because I enjoy it. The camaraderie of talking to the nice people when you're driving, helping people get where they need to go, whether it's the airport, take them food, take them other packages. Like I remember taking a young girl's ballet bag. A mom had me go take it to somebody's, to her father's house, something like that. Things like that. You're doing things that are going to help out everybody else. And, it's a chance to kind of just converse. You enjoy driving your car, you like to go and drive, you like to go ahead and throw your music on and, meet some new friends, or really just, network. Just, talk to people, small talk, things like that. While you're just making easy money just to drive. Well, registration's easy. Just download the Uber Driver app and sign on to the Uber Driver app, and then use my code to go ahead and get brought on as a referral so that you can go ahead and start driving today. My code is the number 8. Letter M as in Mary, letter O as in Othello, letter L as in Larry, number 5. 8MOL5. Get paid every week according to hours of service during that week. So when you work and you do your rides for that week, then that Monday is when you're going to get paid. The money then will start getting transferred into your account, and then by Wednesday, the money's in your bank or wherever you want it. Or you can automatically get it express paid and take a little bit of a fee. And if you need the money right then and now to pay for bills or whatever, you can do that too. So if you don't have a car, you can also rent from one of the rental services. Just remember, you got to be 21 years old, have a valid driver's license from the USA with your vehicle registration, own a 4-door vehicle, and have some driving experience at least 1 year. So take that all into account and look at driving for Uber. They've also started a $250 million driver stimulus to boost already high earnings for drivers. So download the Uber Driver app to your Apple or Android phone. Sign up using my code 8MOL5. Check it out for yourselves and enjoy driving with Uber like I do.